Welcome to the silent personalities. Most kings announce themselves with noise, battles, burning halls, a trail of bodies that becomes a timeline. Edgar did something stranger. He ruled in a way that can look almost invisible. No conquering epic, no famous last stand, yet the England that survives him is more tightly bound together than the England he inherited. If you only measure power by how loudly it breaks things, Edgar the Peaceful can seem like a footnote. But if you measure power by how quietly it can make a country hold, then Edgar is one of the loudest silences in early English history. Picture the year 959. England is not a single, smooth shape on a map. It's a stitched fabric. Wessex in the south, Mercia and the Old Danelaw in the Midlands and north. Communities with different legal habits, different loyalties, and long memories of Viking armies and shifting borders. Edgar, born around 943 or 944, has already been pulled into this world of power. Before he is fully grown, he is the younger son of King Edmund I. His older brother is Edwig. And for a moment, England balances on sibling rivalry, one of those fragile moments where a kingdom can split, simply because two men want the same crown. By 957, Edgar is ruling Mercia and Northumbria while Edwig holds Wessex, effectively a partition of the realm. Then Edwig dies in 959, and Edgar becomes king of the English. That transition matters because it prevents the partition from hardening into permanent fracture. The kingdom does not snap into two kingdoms. Instead, it continues, tense but intact, under one ruler. Now listen carefully to what the sources do and do not say about Edgar. Chroniclers don't give us a neat, day-by-day log of his actions. The record is thin in places, and the loudest voices that do survive often belong to churchmen, especially those invested in reform. That doesn't make Edgar less real. It means we have to watch the shape of his reign in the things that changed around him: the church, the law, ritual, money, and the stories later generations chose to tell. Edgar's nickname, the Peaceful, can mislead. Peace in the 10th century is not a modern peace, no promise of safety, no end of violence. It's closer to control. Edgar's reign is remembered as comparatively stable, with fewer internal wars than many of his predecessors and successors. That stability becomes his platform. It lets him do something that war often prevents: standardize. And the most visible standardization is the least romantic, the monastery and the coin. The English Benedictine reform is already stirring when Edgar rises. In the mid-10th century, many religious houses are staffed by secular clergy. Reformers want a stricter monastic life following the rule of St. Benedict, stronger discipline, clearer boundaries, and a church that can project moral authority and administrative order. Under Edgar, this movement peaks especially through the leadership of figures like Dunstan, Ethelwold of Winchester, and Oswald. The king is not merely a spectator. He is a patron, a protector, and when it suits the reform agenda, an enforcer. But reform is never only about holiness. It's also about power, land, appointments, influence, and the ability to shape the culture of an entire kingdom. A monastery is a spiritual engine, yes, but it is also an institution that writes, teaches, stores wealth, and remembers. When reformers rebuild monasteries, they rebuild the kingdom's memory and its bureaucracy at the same time. And Edgar's reign becomes the moment when that institutional rebuilding starts to look like national policy. In about 973, a key document emerges from this movement, the Regulars Concordia, associated with a council at Winchester. Think of it as a blueprint and agreement laying down a common pattern of monastic life for monks and nuns across the English nation. It's linked to Ethelwold and to a reformed culture that is not isolated. It is in conversation with continental monastic centers as well. Whatever your view of its exact drafting process, its intent is clear: unity in practice, unity in ritual, unity in the daily rhythm of worship. And unity is exactly what Edgar's reign is quietly obsessed with. Now turn to the other standard, silver. Money is a kind of speech a king makes every day, in every marketplace. Edgar's coinage is famous because it moves toward uniformity on a national scale, means across the kingdom, producing a consistent design, presenting royal authority in a standardized visual language. Historians note that the reform's exact dating is tricky. There's no contemporary written record that pins it down precisely, and later writers mention it much later. But modern scholarship broadly places a major reform toward the end of Edgar's reign, with an influential tendency to connect it to the early 970s. The point isn't the exact month. The point is the ambition. In a world of local identities, Edgar's England increasingly handles the same kind of penny, bearing the same kind of royal image in dozens of mints. That is what administrative reach looks like when it doesn't arrive with a sword. And then comes the year that later generations cannot stop staring at, 973. On May 11, 973, Edgar is crowned at Bath. The ceremony matters not just because it crowned the man Edgar has been ruling since 959, but because it becomes a statement, almost theatrical in its symbolism, about what kind of kingship Edgar claims. Some accounts treat it as extraordinary, a display of majesty, an assertion of authority, and a ritual that later kings will echo. Even the fact that it is recorded with unusual emphasis in sources is part of the story. It was meant to be noticed. Why the delay? Historians debate the meaning of a coronation 14 years into a reign. One interpretation is that it is less a first crowning than a culminating performance. Edgar presenting himself not merely as a successful ruler, but as an overlord, a king whose authority stretches beyond the English heartlands into a wider Britain. Whatever the precise motive, the effect is that 973 becomes Edgar's symbolic summit, and soon after Bath, the story moves to Chester and into legend. There is a famous image, Edgar at the helm on the River Dee, while other kings row him like subordinates. It's one of those scenes that is so perfect it almost advertises itself, a king literally staring, while rival rulers supply the muscle. But here the historian's caution matters. The event at Chester, some kind of assembly or council involving other rulers, appears in accounts that grow more elaborate over time. Later chroniclers inflate the number of kings and the drama of the gesture. Some sources talk of 6 kings, later ones of 8. The rowing scene is strongly associated with 12th century narrative polish. What likely happened is still significant an acknowledgement of Edgar's standing by neighboring rulers, but the exact choreography may be partly storytelling. The myth is still a clue. Later England wanted Edgar remembered as a king whom other kings moved for. So who is Edgar in this picture? Saintly reformer, careful administrator, imperial overlord, or something more human? Because Edgar's reign is also shadowed by another kind of story, sex, scandal, and the uneasy relationship between personal conduct and public holiness. Some later religious writers describe him as morally flawed, even predatory. Other accounts are more restrained. What we can say with confidence is that Edgar had children by multiple partners, and that questions of legitimacy and succession would later become political weapons. He is linked to 3 consorts in the tradition: Theophil, often associated with the mother of Edward, Wulfthryth, mother of Edith, and Ulfthryth, mother of Ethelred. The details are debated in scholarship because sources are uneven and later narratives have agendas. But the outcomes are concrete. Edgar leaves behind heirs whose competing claims will destabilize the peace he embodied. Edgar dies on July 8, 975, still young, around 31 or 32. He is buried at Glastonbury Abbey, a place bound up with reform culture and royal memory. His death is the end of the quiet. Immediately, England faces a succession dispute between supporters of Edward and supporters of Ethelred, with powerful church figures and factions aligning on each side. Edward becomes king, later remembered as Edward the Martyr, before his own violent end. Ethelred eventually takes the throne, and his reign will be remembered very differently, under the heavy name the Unready. The contrast is brutal, from Edgar's remembered order into a future that will struggle with internal conflict and renewed Viking pressure. So what do we do with Edgar the Peaceful? Here is the documentary truth hiding inside the silence. Edgar's greatness is not a single event, but a pattern. He represents a moment when English kingship becomes more than war leadership. Under him, the kingdom leans into institutions, reformed religious houses that educate and record, rituals that make authority visible, administrative habits that push toward national sameness, and a monetary system that trains people to recognize one royal face across many regions. He is not peaceful because nothing happens. He is peaceful because the most important changes happen without the kingdom tearing itself apart. While they happen,